Okay, great.
Good morning again, everyone. Hopefully everyone had a chance to grab a quick cup of coffee. As I promised you before the break, we have a great presentation coming up for you. Lucas, you know, I was bragging on you before the break because I was telling the audience what a valuable resource you've been for me and how often I rely on your resource directories and some of the programming that you guys do at New Mexico Main Street. So I'm really excited you have a chance to talk about all the work that you're doing. And so because we do have such a broad scope, I don't want to take up any of your time. So I will drop off the screen here in a minute. I'll stay backstage. I'll monitor for, and if there's any comments from the audience in the chat box, and I will be back to join you towards the end of the hour. So great. Lucas Pedraza from New Mexico Main Street.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Lucas Pedraza. I'm the project coordinator for New Mexico Main Street. I will start my presentation here. I'm going to be reading from my screen here sometimes, so I probably will turn off my webcam here. Okay, let's do this. Yeah. And then, okay. And here we go. All right. Good morning, everybody. As I said, my name is Lucas Pedraza. I'm the project coordinator for New Mexico Main Street. We are a program of New Mexico Economic Development Department. I guess, since we are talking about the legislative session here, we are asking for $10 million in capital outlay for our program, and that's money that we use to do different kinds of projects, which I'll go through examples of here at the end of the presentation. And I think, yeah, that's still being discussed at the legislature. As a department for the whole New Mexico Economic Development Department, we are asking for our budgets to stay flat so we can continue to deliver the services we do as a department. But other than that, this presentation is just going to basically go over how our program works, some of the basics of time behind the concepts of how we work. So we are a little bit different from some of our other colleagues at the department, where a lot of our work is geared towards recruitment and retention of businesses on a large scale. We tend to focus more on smaller scale businesses. No, not directly from our program at the state, and I'll talk about this a little bit later on. We have over 30 different communities that we work with. They are nonprofits. They all have executive directors and they have a board, and they have small businesses that participate with them, and that's how they access our resources of the state program. And we do technical assistance, in which I'll cover a little bit towards the end. We do all kinds of things for small businesses and for the district. And primarily the businesses that we serve work with our 30 Main Street communities we have around the state. So to start off, I'm going to have a brief overview of asset-based economic development, which is really where we are in terms of how we work at the state. I'll probably go about 40 minutes and hopefully leave some room for questions towards the end, and also have my contact information at the end of this presentation, and you'll be able to reach out to us for any questions. Okay. So we'll do a quick kind of contrast of the kinds of work that generally we do at the state of New Mexico. So most of our programs are geared towards like e-based economic development. They're usually large-scale projects, and they consist with helping manufacturing, construction, infrastructure and transportation kinds of businesses. They also they help those kinds of businesses sort of expand and develop and help to export. Then there's a part of it that's recruiting external businesses, tech businesses, auto, lately a lot of film industry kind of businesses that we have brought into the state. And they mostly focus on the export of goods. So Netflix, we help them come to Albuquerque, and they obviously produce a product, which is a film, which is then sold on their platform, which is sold all over the country and around the world. And usually what they do is for this kind of work is leverage public resources through LEDA and other kinds of infrastructure incentives and tax abatements and job training funds to lure those kinds of businesses and help these kinds of businesses in the state expand. And this creates a nice job base of good paying jobs that really help the economy move forward. And for us, we focus more on the asset-based economic development. So we work through 30 different communities, or more than that actually, within the state, and I'll show you a little bit of that. And we focus more on a bottom-up approach, community-driven. So a lot of each organization is run by, as I said, by one director usually, and maybe they have some sports staff, or they work with a local chamber of commerce or their local municipalities economic development department. And then on the board of these organizations are usually people from the community, anywhere from teachers to lawyers to doctors, whoever may want to participate in it. A lot of times we encourage a lot of participation from your local small businesses, to help develop the goals for the district. And usually what we do is focus on the community's natural environment, social, cultural, and economic assets, and how these can be leveraged to sustain economic growth and productivity. So every place has something especially unique. You may have a nice mix of shops. You may have some cultural events that are in the area. You may be near a lot of places where tourists like to come to go skiing and go hiking and those kinds of things. And we try to find ways to use that to build up your local economy. And that's usually where we go in and benefit the small business community, a lot of restaurants, and those kinds of businesses that really help bring people to the state or help people spend within the state. And through this kind of approach, this is how we strengthen the local and regional economy. And we also use local investments, public and private, for economic development projects. Most of the time, we don't normally get a lot of leader projects, but it can happen once in a while, and I'll have an example here later. Most of what we do is more provide direct technical assistance. We're helping people develop websites at a business or something like that. And then just to kind of like broadly define the word assets, we mean buildings. That could be historic buildings. We help fix those up. That's where a lot of our incentives come into play. We also do facade improvements. History can be, your area may have an important part of history that happened in the area. So we use that as a way to draw people to an area, culture, policymakers. Those kinds of things are all important to being successful at this work. And so that's what we mean when we say assets. So usually when we begin with a new community, we work with them and their community to identify what their assets are. And so each community can be a little different. They may have a strong revenue of larger taxes. They may have great resources in terms of like the natural environment or arts and culture in the area. So we work with the local community to identify what is appropriate with the local economy to build off. And I'll show a little bit more of that specific example. And so really what we see, what we do is really an imbalanced approach. We basically do a little bit of both. We use the e-based economic businesses that are around in the community to provide those really steady jobs that provide a lot of income and allow people to buy homes and allow for them to be able to shop in your local shops, which may be a lot of you on the phone today. And so we work in coordination with our partners at the state and at the local municipalities where our communities are to identify areas, strengths in the local community to build up a strong local economy. And really, I guess the best way to sort of think about this is if you want to keep your business or you want to retain a business, it's not just what you can offer them financially, it's also that they want a nice, strong school system. They want to have access to nice restaurants. They want to have access to a nice cultural economy and programming. And so that's where we come in. We help those kinds of aspects of life that everybody's interested in, every community for entertainment and to have some security and make sure there's housing, there's a lot of housing options, those kinds of things. And that's where we come in. There's a lot of community economic development framework is when we believe in this balanced approach that you can't have one without the other. Right. So just from a high level, these are some of the impacts that we have had over the last 7 years. We've had over 1,000 new businesses and business expansions through all our communities. We track this on a quarterly basis. We ask our directors to stay in touch and keep a good relationship with their local businesses and ask them about how much they're expanding their businesses, how many, and figuring out what they need and that kind of stuff. But this is also just the way sorry about that. We keep track of things. All right, so a lot of our work, a lot of our statistics come from building rehabilitation. So when we do a really good job, you start seeing businesses wanting to expand and they spend money in your local economy to fix up buildings, this kind of thing. And that leads to over 176 million private sector reinvestment into our districts. We've created over 4,000 jobs. And again, a really key piece of this is how many volunteer hours we use. And to get 258,000 during this period, and over $3 million in private sector grants. So another big piece of this is fundraising and identifying grants that are appropriate for your community to help them in different areas that they identify as projects. All right. So I'm gonna give you a brief introduction to our general Main Street approach. So there's a national Main Street center. Main Street is something that operates nationally. So there's almost a lot of states have different flavors of a program like this, but it starts with the same kind of concepts, and I sort of going through that right now. We were established in 1985. A program of the state of New Mexico Economic Development Department. So we help create different organizations, which will start. So to have a community come and they usually apply to us, and you can see all the different communities here on this map. So if you are in the community, you go onto our website and find out who's running the organization. And if you want to see what kind of services or I don't know what's happening. What's going on in your community, what kind of services you can access, what kind of centers you can access. I highly recommend you go to our website, newmexicomainstreet.org, to see what's going on in your local community and participate. They're always looking for new volunteers, and they need your input, especially as businesses. If you're into the local politics, those are all. Or even if you just want to go help with a community garden. These are great organizations to go and spend your time in. This is how I actually got involved with New Mexico Main Street. Started as when I was in graduate school, helping my local Borales Community Coalition, the Main Street program. And when I finished, I actually became a director for a while. And I fell in love with it so much, and now I'm working at the state. So I really highly encourage you. It's very rewarding work, not only for your business, but also just as active community member. You get a lot from it. Participating with your local Main Street program. Okay, so we operate through a 4-point approach. The 4 points, starting with economic vitality, the whole work, that's what we're here for, to build a diverse economic base, catalyze smart new investments, cultivate strong entrepreneurship ecosystem. We're all about supporting your local entrepreneurs and making sure that you're not sort of investing too much in just one place and making sure you have a nice balanced economy that can sustain itself over a long time. Design, which is really more about what's going on in terms of your street landscape, is create an inviting, inclusive atmosphere to celebrate the historic character, do designs of buildings and the rehabilitation of buildings, and foster accessible people-centered public spaces. So this is where a lot of our capital outlay money goes into to help create these very nice commercial districts that encourage more investment from the business owners that are there, and also encourage business owners to move into the district. And also create a nice shopping experience. So you need some of these public spaces and murals and those kinds of things that invite people to come downtown and spend their money with you in your community. Organization, we're really big on building leadership and strong organizational capacity. We work with lots of different community members. As I said, I started as a graduate student, not knowing much about how to do this kind of work, and through all the different trainings that we offer, I became an executive director, and I am now where I'm at. And a lot of people come in and get a lot from the work that we do here. But really, it's about building up a strong organization that's resilient and is able to fundraise and also able to organize with the community, local business owners, and different nonprofits and your local municipality to get the work done and create the plans and strategy that work for your community. Promotion is the last point. It's really defining what the character of a place, defining what the place is, what's unique about it, and using storytelling to really help support the buy local experience. So in each one of these 4 points, we have revitalization specialists, people, contractors that we work with who are very well trained in all these points and help work with your local community to develop strategies and projects that implement the strategy you have put in place and help you achieve your economic development goals. So some guiding principles for us. We are asset based, as I mentioned earlier, comprehensive. So sometimes some projects are not always just depends on the needs of the community. It's not always just about small businesses. Sometimes you might work with a local housing authority to get a housing project done because housing is an important need for downtown. Businesses need people who can walk out of their door and go get a beer at your shop or get some lunch. So sometimes housing is a project that we work on. So it all depends on your local assets and your local needs. We're very incremental, so we don't just start with the big projects and try to knock out a home run because most of the time you will end up striking out, to use a baseball analogy. So you got to start off small and figure out little by little what your organization can do, build up the organization capacity and experience within your volunteers and your executive director and your local community to start actually buying into what you're doing. So if you're a new program and you haven't really done much in the community yet, it's hard to get local business owners to, buy into what you're trying to get done, or even your local municipality sometimes, So you start off small and you show that the impact that you can have, and you start moving forward. And that kind of goes into with our implementation focus. So and then when it comes to a point that you can start getting some larger projects, that's when we start working with you on developing a capital outlay project, something that may use capital outlay funds from the state. And we always want to make sure that those are high quality. And by high quality, we mean really that's gotten vetted through the community, your local entrepreneurs, your local government, to make sure that these are not wasted public dollars, that they will actually pay off in the end. So I'll move on here. So beyond just like a full Main Street program, I wanted to also mention that we have what we call arts and cultural districts. Most of our arts and cultural districts have now been moved into a Main Street program, but which means they have a part of what they do is really focusing on the creative or cultural economy, working with arts and cultural centers in your area, councils, businesses that are run by artists and those kinds of things, and so that we have a whole sort of unique set of assistance that we can provide to communities that have a lot of that as an asset in their community. Frontier and Native communities are really more one-off, single catalytic economic development projects that only operate within 12 to 18 months. So they may not be in a small community that's rural community that may not be interested or can sustain a full Main Street program with a full-time executive director all the time, but has some volunteers and maybe got a little grant money to get something done. We do open up a process for Frontier Native communities, and we will soon be also opening up a process for urban communities to participate. And these are, again, not full-blown Main Street programs, but they do get access to a lot of the services we provide. And again, this is all driven by people at the local level, a lot of entrepreneurs or people just generally interested in seeing something happen in their community. And like a Main Street program, each one of these kinds of projects have to demonstrate some kind of positive impact, economic impact, and job creation, business development, or the creation and expansion of businesses. So I can get into a little bit of this later on, but we will be opening up that process soon to bring in some more projects in the frontier native communities and as well as an urban program we will be running. All right. So this let's get into more of the nuts and bolts of how our local communities are expected to work with their, our local organizations are expected to work with their local community and sort of how the concept works on the ground. So every local community that's a Main Street program, they have to demonstrate that they are working in all these different areas, community stakeholders, state government. You have to have a revitalization corporation, and they also have to work with their local government. So this is a public-private partnership in every sense of the word. Your local government partner, if you're a Main Street program, provides funding to help staff the Main Street program. And there's a lot of coordination and planning that goes along with between the local Main Street program and the local government partner. So this is really the heart of this is really to bring together all these different voices in the community that have different ideas and different perspectives on what's going on in the community. And the really big benefit of what we do as a Main Street program in a local community is really creating consensus of what needs to happen and a plan that what needs to happen. And identifying where the weaknesses are collectively and where the strengths are collectively. And from there, you're able to build that momentum to really get these large scale projects done and from the small scale projects. That's where you're able, it's through this kind of cooperation that you get the attention of your local legislators, through your local organizations who may not have the time to really put into really developing this kind of cohesion among the community and different organizations that exist. And so this is really at the heart of what most our Main Street directors should be doing. They should be working and reaching out to your local mayor or their local city council member, their local state representatives, also getting to know their businesses within their district, their schools, to nonprofits that may be operating in the neighborhood, and also just the local residents, because residents are also important in the process because you need to know what they want, what they're demanding in terms of services in their community, and also what they don't want. You can't propose things that they're not going to want because then your job becomes very difficult very quickly, and you lose your credibility and resources that are going to help you get your projects done. So this is where a lot of the work is really spent doing to build up a really strong Main Street program. So just to give you a brief an understanding of how to become a Main Street, because right now we are not accepting any new applications for any new communities just yet. If you want to get your feet wet in this kind of work right now, we would be either a frontier community or urban program, which we encourage for people to do anyway before they actually go for a full-fledged Main Street program. It helps us understand where your needs are and the willingness of local volunteers and local government to really invest into a program, full-blown program. But it also really helps the local community decide if they want to be a full-blown Main Street program. Sometimes you may just need help with one project, and maybe in a couple of years you may have another project that you may need help with. So it may not make sense to run and staff a full Main Street program. It does take a lot of work. But here, usually when we do open up the application process, we submit it, we review, and we do an assessment to see how ready you are to make sure that there's representation from your local community and all different sectors. And then we select it and designate an area for you to work on. So we always focus on a core commercial district. It can branch out a little bit, but mostly we're interested in the Main Street and helping out with something like that in your area. So And then, so the process is you go through, if you're accepted, you go through an accelerated process where we put you and your board through your board and your executive directors through a lot of training, and then eventually become a Main Street affiliate, and then later on Main Street America accredited, which is really where you become able to access way more things in terms of federal grants and um, uh, other resources that we may provide. Okay, and so here are the number of main kind of supports that you might find as a local entrepreneur, or if you are interested in having a Main Street program. These are the different kinds of things we will give you support with. We can help folks identify, put you in contact with people who can help you find leader funds if you're a business and you're interested in expanding. We do a lot to help our local communities understand what's out there in terms of federal grants, local grants, in different areas in the nonprofit sector where there's interest in funding projects. We spend a lot of time helping our local directors understanding how to do grant writing, and also how to identify what's most appropriate for them. We help people with tax credits. This is mostly in their historic sort of buildings, kind of tax credits. We'll help people identify business development incentives if you have a local business that is interested in that. We have a partnership with the New Mexico Resiliency Alliance. It's a nonprofit foundation that goes and seeks grants and then distributes it to our other partner, our Main Street network. So a lot of our facade squad kind of projects. So if you're a business in the local Main Street, you may want to ask your local Main Street about this. Every year, depending on how much funding there is available, we do facade squad improvements through our local Main Street, and that is funded through our Resiliency Alliance grants. And I have some examples of that later, I believe. And just to give some other kinds of things that are really good that we do, we have folks on our team who can help you with helping establish a metropolitan redevelopment area and identify a plan that can work for your community. And we do lots of graphic design work. We help sometimes businesses develop a website and even e-commerce capabilities within for businesses within our Main Street districts. And we provide tons and tons of professional development training and education for our staff and volunteers and even businesses. Sometimes we'll have somebody come out to the community and help businesses understand how to do branding, marketing, and promotion of their own business, or how they can work together with the Main Street program to really help market the area and to get more customers into the area. Okay, so here are some Main Street asset-based project examples. First, I guess this is where a lot of our capital outlay money goes into, is Great Blocks on Main Street. And this is a program that local Main Streets can tap into once they've sort of reached an accredited level. And what we do, and a lot of my job, is to actually go into a community after they've had some success and they're ready to take on something a little bit more resources, and it takes a commitment of a few years to start with a project and identify what is really going to be most impactful for a community. Whether it's street improvements, whether it's parks, whether it's street lighting, other kinds of infrastructure. We work with you from the beginning to end to identify what that is, what the community, what your kind of investment your community could really most benefit from. And so we work with you to do that, and then we provide funding to develop what they call construction ready documents that are shovel ready. And this is, like as I said, the $10 million that we're asking for is to help develop some of these documents and also complete the shovel ready documents. And we already know that we're in a recession, or caused by COVID-19. And so this has been part of our appeal to state legislators, that we're ready to go ahead and start making some improvements in our local communities, so that when things open up, and this has already happened, not even without everything opening up completely, we get a lot of investment into our communities right now. And it's shown, it's been proven through our model, that once you have planned and created these projects and get the resources in, businesses like to see that kind of activity going on, and that there's a lot of interest from the general public and the public sector and the private sector that's already there to start planning and spending and improving things, so that when things open up, everything is ready to go and it becomes an attractive place to invest your money and start your business. Um, so a lot of the work comes in some places, like I said, it could vary. The kinds of public infrastructure projects that get identified can vary very much. Some places may just have really hard time with flooding, and their sewage systems are not able to handle it because they're outdated, or they weren't created correctly in the first place. And so some places it may be something like fixing the sewer and sewage systems. It's harder to attract businesses or retain businesses, which that keeps happening when there's flooding and damage to stores and roads, and people are just not able to get access to downtown during times of storms or those kinds of things. And sometimes maybe there's not enough water supply. So we've done some work in I believe some providing broadband for communities. Um, but these are the kinds of projects that we are helping with in local communities. Um, and it starts with your local partners and your local stakeholders and public input to figure out what public investment will make the most sense to catalyze more investment into your community and retain your businesses you have, as well as recruit new ones. So we had here an example of Raton public infrastructure project. That was a great project. Started with the city of Raton and the Raton Main Street Arts and Culture District. There was a $2 million investment for a multimodal center, water line, street resurfacing, curb and gutter replacement. New Mexico Main Street provided architectural and engineering planning and documents, and we provided Main Street technical assistance to support the primary investment throughout the whole process. Redevelopment sort of targets the infrastructure, rehabilitation. We targeted the physical assets, buildings, those kinds of things to be improved. And then what happens after that is you get more spending from your private district or private entities in your district. Here is some of the drawings that we came up with. This is all done with New Mexico Main Street assistance. We have architects and landscape architects on board who can help develop these designs and concepts. So the phase one was to do the planning and develop the construction ready documents. Phase two was to decide what public infrastructure needed to be invested in. Sometimes it's just lighting or wayfinding. It's like, so people can find their way around the district where the historical places are in locations of interest that people want to find. Sometimes you may have old lighting. You need brighter lighting that helps people light up the district, help people feel safe and walking around. And just like a fresh coat of paint can make a big difference in a district sometimes. It's surprising to make it much more attractive to be in as an environment. And then after you get that kind of work done, that's when you start seeing the building rehab and business development start to happen. And here's just some pictures of some of the work we've done. You can see the road conditions are terrible. Doesn't look like a very friendly place to hang out. And this is how it looks after the work is done. All right, you revitalize this place. It looks fresh. I want to hang out there. You want to bring your friends down there and have a beer, get some pizza, something like that. These are create much more exciting places to live and work and play. And that's what we call placemaking. Here is some of the smaller projects I was talking about. Sometimes there could be something like this before you have the money to invest in, let's say, some nice bricks for a crosswalk. You could start off with something like this. It just takes some volunteer work, some paint, and you create a 3D crosswalk. And it creates something fun for people to do and engage in and raise interest in your downtown. And just something like this can make a good time downtown and make people come down to that district and spend their money and hang out. So this is the Red Ball Cafe in Albuquerque. And this is one of our communities in Morelos. I actually worked on this a little bit. This building actually was benefiting from years ago from historic tax credit. The building was dilapidated and was not safe to inhabit at first. many years ago, and through the help of the New Mexico Main Street program, the owner was able to access historic tax credits. And refresh it. And then now, even within the last few years, we worked. So this is one of those projects where we worked with our one of our local organizations, and New Mexico Gas Company funded us to do improvements to including repainting the sidewalks, and also helping with the facade, and some other things here. And then so after the project was done, you can see the patio was redone as well. And so after the project was done, there was a event held there with a car show, and was held in the parking lot there at the cafe, and helped them get a nice start off as a business, because this business was closed, it was family owned. The owners were not able to run the project, the business anymore, and so they got a younger family member who could take over the business, and they approached us to get some help to restart the business and help give it a nice launch in the community. And this is what we're able to do for them to help them get a nice start with a great event and some new paint and some other things that help the place pop. Um, Here's just a little example of a library park apartment in Leventon. You can see we started with a very simple concept design, and this was also done with a $9,000 grant from New Mexico Resiliency Alliance. This created a nice little place to hang out down in downtown Lovington, where you can go and get your food, have your lunch, hang out with the kids. And it's a nice alternative to a local mall or your local Walmart. This is some place you really want to bring your family and stay and enjoy your local community. And these are what we're talking about in terms of these smaller projects that don't cost a lot and just take a little bit of work from the volunteers in your community. Here is a facade squad in Roswell. Um, Two different buildings, a J.C. Penney building from 1903 on the left, and on the right you have a former bank from 1912. They had trouble attracting businesses into these places, and they decided in their community this could not help the district. This having these buildings breaking down and decaying and being vacant, they decided to focus on this to help improve the district and their chances of coming back. And through our program, I believe this was also funded with our partners, the Resiliency Alliance. And you can see the beginning there into what the final product was. Las Cruces is another one. Okay, I'm getting a little short in time here, so pace here. Again, another facade squad kind of project here. Very simple, $5,000 grant, some local help from the community, and some lighting updates and facade repair, and you have a brand new looking space here, or corner of the Main Street district, that really improves the appeal of the district in general. Here's this example of a larger scale project. It's a landmark listed site. It was on the National and State Register, and it sat vacant for 30 years due to remediation issues. Usually, you have all kinds of things that develop in a building that make it very hard for even a private developer to come in and rehabilitate a building that's old. So in this particular case, the city acquired the building in 2003, and this is done through a metropolitan redevelopment area designation. So the building was in a metropolitan redevelopment area, and because the city owned the building in Mexico Main Street, was able to supply a capital outlay grant to help remediate the building, to help offset the cost of remediating the building. And it was achieved through a public-private partnership today. So we used, I think no, we didn't use it on this one. So today it's open. The hotel includes a mixed-use space that includes housing, 31 units, an event facility, and a 8,000 square foot commercial space for lease. It is elite platinum certified and maintained designation on historic registers. Anything we do, whenever we touch a historic building, we like to keep as much of it as we can to keep that unique character for your district. Um, uh, so then, as a result of this, 2 other additional housing projects were then done in the local community, which brought more units to the house, to the area, more people living, more residents living in the downtown district, who then, of course, go and purchase furniture and other kinds of services and things they need from the downtown businesses. Okay, here's another interesting example. This is in Lovington as well. This is Drylands Brewing. Have good beer and pizza there. I've been there before. This was a gas station that burned down in the 70s. The city inherited the property. It was not being, obviously it was too damaged for anybody to be interested in coming and invest it directly. So the city inherited the property. They tried to sell it. They could not sell it. So what they did is they put out, thanks to the MRA, Metropolitan Redevelopment Area, which again, we help our local communities establish and identify projects with. So they set up a RFP for development and sold it for $100 to a local developer. And then still they decided to develop it into a microbrewery and pizza place. So New Mexico Main Street, we provided the supports for the business to figure out what kinds of hurdles they were going to have to go over in terms of regulation, and what would be the best way for them to sort of operate and get investment into, or get the capital stack to actually finish this project. And because it was considered manufacturing, and they were actually making beer on the premises, we were able to get $100,000 in state leader funds to help develop it. And of course, there's requirements in terms of how many jobs they need to create and sustain for the life of the project, and also secured $80,000 leader funds for economic development from the local Lovington municipality. The place opened in 2017 and I haven't heard from them since the COVID-19, but they were in the process of opening a second location in Hobbs. Okay. So in terms of COVID-19, I just wanted to touch on a little bit. So since COVID-19 has happened, we shifted our sort of priorities. We couldn't continue as business as usual. We changed our sort of strategy for the short term to help businesses actually get more funds straight to businesses to just keep their doors open during closure, that kind of stuff. And then we help our districts develop recovery plans. So it's not enough to just kind of continue as business as usual. We know that things are going to be different coming out of this, and we are encouraging all of our programs to really think through what makes sense for them to reopen. Is it going to be a new park? Is it going to be a transformation of your public spaces so people can social distance properly? Do you need wider sidewalks? Do you need to rethink how you're going to set up your seating in your public spaces or on the street? These are the kinds of things that we are encouraging our local Main Street programs to start thinking about and start implementing. The organizations are always funded by a local partnership through their local municipality, but also they are responsible for fundraising through other means. So they may hold events where people donate money or they apply for grants. And so we encourage them to be thinking about this constantly. So far, because of the relief packages that our local governments have received, most of I think all of our organizations stay funding, and especially since we help provide a lot of support to small businesses, we've been able to keep our programs funded. And we work with them to show constantly to our local governments and our local legislators how the work has been impactful during this crisis, and of course over the years, and how they use that to how they use social media and other tools to share their success. And this is really important also, as well as to get local businesses to participate in the organization. We teach them to be strategic and assess their risks, and keep finding different strategies. that will work for them. So, in terms of economic vitality, our executive directors at our local organizations have been very good at being the boots on the ground. They are our folks on the front lines, seeing what's happening with their local businesses, and constantly working and seeing to see what works to help keep businesses open, to see what would help them start up again when things open up, and to focus on recruiting new businesses as well, because we do know that people are going to shut down, unfortunately, because of what's happened. And when things open up again, you need to get those vacant properties filled as soon as possible. And you need to understand your customers' habits. At the beginning of this, before COVID-19 happened, people had different ways of interacting in public spaces, and things may change now. And so it's important to understand that people may be much more conscious about health, and safety protocols. And so you need to understand how you can market and give your local community and what kind of businesses and services they will need, because it may change, and also help people feel safe being in your downtown district. Um, so design may be a big part of that. I will say that during our uh, COVID-19, a lot of our effort has been to help our local organizations and businesses understand the COVID-19 restrictions, and what kinds of new policies local municipalities are passing to allow people to take advantage of parking lots and tents, and how you can set up your space to make sure that you're maintaining social distancing, still being able to operate efficiently as a business. So a lot of our technical support through our local Main Street, especially in terms of design, has been related to that. Um, and and we know that going forward, there may be some public infrastructure projects that may be related to the street to extend sidewalks, so that way people can move tables onto the sidewalk, or allow more room for circulation on the sidewalk, those kinds of things. So we've been very proactive in trying to help local communities understand those things and make the most use of what's available to them through the local municipality and the state. Um, um, we're trying to leverage out growth for outdoor recreation. Is another one of the big points of emphasis for us right now. It's one of the best things we do in the state. One of the things we're blessed with is good weather and lots of recreation opportunities outdoor. So that's one of the ways we can keep dollars flowing into our local communities, connecting these kinds of things that you may have in your community, whether it be hiking, camping, those kinds of stuff, and and thinking about things that you could do in the local community with street closures and creating walking districts and events that people can safely participate in, and also still shop in your local district. Um, so I won't get too much into these. I think as things open up, we'll be focusing more on special events and festivals as well, and ways to promote downtown that are safe, and understand what the current situation is locally for community, if it's red, if it's green. We can help you understand what you can and cannot do, when can something open up, when can it, and plan accordingly to get people back into our communities and shopping. This is just a quick thing I will mention here. This is Choose Main Street. There's a marketing campaign that we've been running. We've on our Facebook and social media outlets to get people to keep thinking about shopping local. It's very easy for people to just go and shop on Amazon or go to a place like Walmart. We are trying to raise awareness about how you can still access your local businesses, what kind of services they are providing, so that you can shop safely, whether it's shop online, carry out, those kinds of things, or buy gift cards. We're running a whole campaign based on this, and we may turn this into a website where it helps local communities keep their local community shopping in their district, and also get people from other parts of the state to come and shop in their districts. So will be ongoing as we develop and find what's actually needed. So we mentioned earlier, there's lots of things on our website that I would love for you guys to go and check if you're an entrepreneur. We've got all kinds of coronavirus, especially tailored stuff, and stuff that's not even necessarily just about coronavirus, what can happen, what you can do during COVID-19 on our website. And so that's Main Street, nmmainstreet.org. I highly encourage you to check out what's there in terms of our webinars and presentations. We make it free and available to everybody and anybody. You can get information about our normal programs, but also get a better idea of what you can do locally in your community to help your small businesses survive everything that's going on. And if you really want to see how much impact we've had in our community, I suggest you go there and help us advocate for our capital outlay and as well as a flat budget for our department. And I promise you, if you see our website, you'll be impressed. You will learn something, and you would also become a believer in our Main Street program. So I'd like to thank you all for your time today. Here is my contact information as well as our office's contact information. You can email me, call me. I'd be happy to talk more in depth with you about some of these things. I have been here with the State Main Street program for a year. So some things I may not necessarily have all the background and history on, but if I can't answer to your question right away, I will be happy to get some information to you and send it to you or talk to you about it on the phone. Okay. So that is all.
Lucas, I have to say, you win the award for putting the most information into a presentation. That was amazing. It was so informative and so helpful. And we actually had a few questions come through, but you ended up addressing some of them. So I just have a couple of things maybe that you can hit on really quickly before we move to the next presentation. I have to throw in a personal note, which is I am so excited about the Hotel Clovis project. I have spent so much of my career driving back and forth and driving through Clovis, and that building always made me feel sad. And I cannot wait now. On my next trip to Clovis, I'm going to make sure I get a tour of that property just so I can see the revitalization, because seeing, again, a centerpiece of a small town sit dormant for so long, it's so exciting to know that project has come about. And that sort of leads to the comment that I maybe you can just restate the importance of this. I think one of the things your presentation really did a great job of is showing what capital outlay can actually do, because I think for a lot of people involved with the legislative process, capital outlay becomes like this gigantic number out there, but they don't really see how it gets invested in the community. And so I appreciate the fact that you showed some very specific projects, but can you hit again on what individuals do? You touched on it briefly at the end about sort of making sure their legislators know to support your capital outlay projects, what they can do in that regard.
Sure. So capital outlay money can't necessarily, because of the state rules, you can't necessarily fund it straight to a business. However, if you're within a metropolitan redevelopment area and there's a property, let's say, owned by a local government, then there are some other kinds of ways to access funds, but generally, usually how capital outlay funds may work for a local developer, for example, is when a local municipality has bought a property and find it that property is not, in a market way, it can't resolve itself, and so there needs to be a case to be made that there needs to be some public investment in a property to get it up to code and ready to use. And then so a local business can develop the property and inhabit that space. So usually if it's going to be that would have to happen through an RFP process and working with your local municipality. And the local municipality is the one who directs the funds to do that kind of work. And otherwise, generally, there's public infrastructure that can be done. So if you bought a building already and not necessarily owned by the state or the city, there may be incentives that can be provided to get like the sewage problem get dealt with and those kinds of things if you work within a metropolitan development area.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much for giving us your time today. I look forward to being able to connect more of our participants with this process and more of, in particular, my hospitality association members, sort of get them connected if they're not familiar with all the great work that you do. And again, it's so exciting to see these resources and see you guys working so hard to make them accessible and to be part of economic recovery. And so thank you again. And we'll be calling on you for more presentations and to highlight more of the great work that you do in the coming months.
All right, great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Lucas.
See you.
So as promised, next up, we are going to be talking about the premier largest industry in New Mexico, which is the oil and gas business. And we didn't want to get through this virtual roundhouse without letting the Oil and Gas Association talk about what's going on in the industry, what's happening in the legislative session, because again, it is an economic driver in our state. It impacts so many communities across the state. And so it's my pleasure this morning to introduce Ryan Flynn from the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association. And he is going to take some time to, again, talk about the work of the association, talk about the state of the industry, talk about their plans for 2021, excuse me, and sort of highlight some of the points of the legislative session. So I don't want to take away from his time. So Ryan, I will drop off and monitor the chat room for you and let you know as the questions come in, but the stage is yours.
All right. Can you hear me okay, Kathy, before you drop off?
Perfect. You sound great.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm going to share my screen and let's see, hopefully this will work. And hopefully, I don't know if anyone can see, but hopefully my presentation is up on the screen right now.
Not seeing it yet.
Okay. It's not, there we go. Why does it not want to? There we go. Okay, does that work? We
there? Yep, you're on.
All right, there we go. Well, again, thank you so much for having me. There's so much activity occurring right now in the oil and gas sector, and New Mexico has been the focal point of the oil and gas industry for the last couple of months. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But New Mexico, a lot of people outside of the southeastern portion of the state and the northwestern portion of the state, which are producing regions, are surprised when they hear that New Mexico is the third largest oil producer in the United States. And the United States is the largest producer of oil in the world. We have now supplanted Russia and Saudi Arabia as being the #1 producer of oil and gas in the world. So quite a bit of activity occurs in New Mexico. And then the last couple of months, we've really taken center stage because of the historic nomination of Congresswoman Deb Haaland to be the Secretary of Interior, as well as a confluence of federal policy decisions, which will play out directly in New Mexico. So I'll talk a little bit about all of this and really leave time for questions if there are questions at the end of my presentation. So with that, I'll start by just talking a little bit about where the industry is today and where what we've seen over the last year. Notwithstanding some of the greatest challenges we've really ever experienced as an industry in terms of a major reduction in demand for our products, we still had a record year of production in 2020, which really is both remarkable and evidence of the resilience of the industry in New Mexico in particular. We had, because people were not moving as a result of the pandemic, and you saw just a huge reduction in demand for oil and gas products. You know, we've continued to move products through air travel, but we really haven't seen the numbers increase for a year now for air travel. And then vehicle traffic, we've seen some bright spots where we've seen some increase in activity, but still, huge portions of the population, including right here in New Mexico, are working from home and working remotely in order to protect their families and their communities. And so because of those measures that are obviously really important to protecting the public during the pandemic, we saw a major reduction in demand for oil and gas products. That's why the fact that we still had a record year of production in New Mexico is really remarkable. And I think it speaks to the fact that the industry in the Permian Basin is the most resilient and stable sector of the entire industry in the United States. And really the only thing that can disrupt the industry in the Permian is policy. Prices, which used to historically drive production, are no longer a major factor in terms of maintaining high levels of production in the Permian Basin. It's really policy is really the only limiting factor for record-setting production and really high levels of production to continue. Last year, the industry generated $2.8 billion of revenue for the state budget, and that is in just direct revenue. That's not starting, if you start getting into indirect revenue, the numbers become well over $17 billion when you look at the economic activity associated with the industry. But if you just look at royalties and taxes paid directly to the state, the industry provided $2.8 billion to the state. We are by far and away the largest source of revenue for the state of New Mexico. And that revenue obviously goes to fund, every government service. Everything that we provide as a state government comes from a large portion of that comes directly from oil and gas taxes that are paid to the state. Of that $2.8 billion, $1.4 billion went toward public education in New Mexico. So largest source of revenue for the state and the largest source of revenue for public education in the state. And that's one of the reasons why the industry, while it is really active in certain regions of the state, the entire state sees the impacts of the oil and gas industry, really from a revenue perspective. In Santa Fe, there's no oil and gas activity that's ever going to occur in Santa Fe County, aside from filling up your car at a pump. Otherwise, we're not really producing anything in Santa Fe or Bernalillo County or Doña Ana County. Really, it's limited to the regions I mentioned in the southeast and northwest, but the benefits flow to each and every county through the state government revenue and public education revenue that's provided by the industry. Quite frankly, when we're doing well, the state has more resources and opportunities to do things, whether it be increasing teacher pay or providing additional tax incentives to try to diversify our economy, something we certainly as an industry support. So New Mexico is unique compared to Texas in that we have a lot of land where oil and gas activity occurs that's actually owned by either the federal government or the state government. And so because of some major policy events I'll talk about in a minute, activity on federal lands has been really something that's been talked about all across the country. I mean, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, everyone has been talking about New Mexico production on federal lands because of the appointment of Congresswoman Holland and Biden administration policies regarding oil and gas development on federal lands. So of the $2.8 billion that that the New Mexico oil and gas industry provided to the state last year, 1.5 billion of that the royalty came from activity on federally owned and managed lands. So we have lands that are owned and managed by the state through the land office, lands that are owned by the federal government through the Bureau of Land Management, and then we have private land as well as activity on tribal lands in the Northwest. So we have 4 different ownership structures in New Mexico, and most importantly, about 1.5 billion of that 2.8 came directly from federal royalties paid to the state. I mentioned before that the 54% of oil and gas revenue came from activity on federal lands in New Mexico. So a pretty large amount of activity occurring there. When you look at the national landscape, New Mexico is really critical to production on federal lands because 53% of the total federal oil production comes from New Mexico, and 59% of the total gas production comes from New Mexico. So New Mexico is by far and away the largest producer of oil and gas on federal lands in the United States. So we have a huge amount of production activity that occurs on federal lands in New Mexico, really driven primarily at this time by the Permian Basin, which is the epicenter of the oil and gas industry right now. The industry provides 134,000 jobs in the state. Again, we're the largest, not only source of revenue, but the largest industry employer in the state. Last year, we had a record 117 rigs. And so rig count is a really important metric for the industry because it speaks to how much new production people are bringing online. It also is an economic indicator because each rig provides approximately 50 to 70 jobs per rig. And those jobs, the average wages are over $80,000 a year. So rig count is an important indicator of where the industry is going in the state. And it was really high about a year ago. And I'll mention here in a little while to talk about where rig count is today, because it hasn't quite recovered, even though prices have recovered. So the last year, our industry, like so many other industries, really had to survive. And like I mentioned in the beginning, we were facing a challenge that we've never seen before as a society. I mean, we've in the last, I think, century, or a little bit over a century between the last global pandemic, society has rapidly changed in terms of our transportation infrastructure, how we move about, not only within the boundaries of our state and our nation, but also globally, and how we engage in commerce all across the globe. So all of those challenges that we've faced in response to the public health crisis that we faced really had a huge impact on our industry as well. And again, I know we were certainly not alone. There were a lot of people and industries who suffered during this time, but oil and gas really went through an incredibly trying stretch. And I would just mention here, I love these pictures because I don't know how many parents are on the line, but it was really incredibly challenging, I think, just speaking personally, having to adjust. And now I think we're finally getting the hang of it. But gosh, going from being a teacher, helping your children, to balancing your job, and to really trying to adjust to this new normal during the pandemic was incredibly difficult, certainly for me as a working parent. And I really have a newfound appreciation for computer technology, since I was not that great at it before I started homeschooling my children. But really presented huge challenges for our industry, like so many other industries. This is the one interesting point I would make, and I'll kind of move quickly through the rest of my presentation. But when it comes to rig count that I mentioned a couple minutes ago, typically rig count will increase. People will bring more rigs into the state when there's an increase in prices. And so production has been very stable and high, but you would have expected to actually see production continue to increase. And that's been what we've seen over the last 5 years in New Mexico, where you've seen production continuously remain high and increasing. And right now, even though prices have recovered to pre-pandemic levels, the rig count has remained very low. And if I look at this slide, if you look to the right of the screen, you see the green line references the weekly price of oil in the United States. And then the blue bar graph shows how many rigs are in the state on a weekly basis. And so you see a huge gap all the way to the right of the screen between the green line and the blue bar graph, reflecting that rigs, new drilling activity is not picking up with an increase in prices. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but primarily that's due to uncertainty regarding federal policy in New Mexico. And the reason why I believe very strongly that that's the case is because we've seen, if we put up the same chart and we showed the rig count in the Texas side of the Permian Basin, you would see actually a major uptick in rig count associated with the uptick in WTI weekly price. So federal policy absolutely does impact how people are viewing investments in capital moving forward in the state. Notwithstanding the fact that we're not seeing the same type of new production we would expect to see given prices, the Permian Basin, which New Mexico shares with Texas, is by far and away the most important strategic oil field in the United States. And it really is the epicenter of the American oil and gas industry, which is the top producing oil industry in the world. So the Permian Basin is hugely important and will continue to remain important. Like I said, the only real potential factor to derail production in the Permian Basin in New Mexico is policy at either the state or federal level. There were two recent activities that occurred at the federal level, the first of which was much more disruptive than the second. And the first was a temporary order that was issued by the Department of Interior the day after President Biden's inauguration. And really, the problem with the order was that it had essentially froze all approvals from the New Mexico Bureau of Land Management, the state BLM office, which manages federal activity in New Mexico. The Department of Interior put out a temporary order saying that any and all authorizations for fossil fuel activities or for oil and gas activities, it actually exempted coal and it exempted oil and gas activities on tribal lands. It only applied to federally managed public lands. It said all activities need to be frozen, essentially. Only approvals could be made by a limited number of political appointees who were just installed at the agency. And so what we've seen as a result of that is that approvals for right-of-ways, for sundries, which are really, a sundry is a routine administrative deviation from a document you previously had obtained, like a permit. So you got a permit a couple months ago and you had to change by a couple of feet the depth of the well. Well, then you would file what's called a sundry with the Bureau of Land Management, just telling them this is the new well depth, and they are routinely approved, as well as permits and other authorizations. And so we saw as a result of that order that regulatory activity has essentially ground to a halt. Typically, the state BLM office would approve somewhere around 300 permits a month and an equally high number of right-of-ways. We saw over the last month less than 20. I believe 19 permits were approved. We saw 4 right-of-way applications approved. And a handful of sundries. So you've essentially seen regulatory activity grind to a halt in the state as a result of this order. What we hear a lot of from critics is that the industry has thousands of permits. Just drill away on all of those permits. Well, there's 2 problems with that argument. Number one, as I mentioned, our permits, it's not like a parking permit that just says go. You have 2 hours to keep your car here. These are highly technical documents with engineering specifications contained throughout the document. So even if you have a permit, there are oftentimes going to be minor technical changes that need to be updated in that permit. And in order to get those changes approved, you file a sundry with your state BLM office and get approval to move forward. Well, because of this freeze, that activity has stopped. So many people with permits that were approved are unable to actually do anything with the permits because they can't get the sundries they need to drill in compliance with the law. The second issue is that even if you have a permit, you still need a pipeline in order to manage the oil and the gas that you're developing from that well. And in order to connect a well to a pipeline, you need to get a right-of-way. And so without right-of-ways, producers have to either elect not to produce their well and therefore deny revenue to the state, or they can truck or use rails to move oil from the well, which increases greenhouse gas emissions and increases costs for producers, as well as still needing to manage natural gas that you're producing along with the oil. And at times that will increase flaring events. So not having infrastructure in the form of pipelines and gathering lines in place when you do have a permit actually creates some major unintended consequences, either from a cost perspective or from an environmental perspective. So that 60-day order that we're still under today has created a huge amount of disruption for producers in the state and is actually going to cost New Mexico in the next year or two quite a bit of revenue. The second order, which I'll only briefly touch on because it really doesn't have much of a short-term impact, was the president's executive order on climate. And there, President Biden said we're going to put a pause of an indefinite period of time on any new oil and gas leases as they undergo a programmatic review throughout the Department of Interior. In the short term, this really is not incredibly disruptive at all to the industry. And I think from an industry perspective, I think we understand President Biden is going to move in a different direction and absolutely should have time as he forms his administration and gets his people in place in order to make sure that the program reflects the policy direction of this new administration. And I don't think I certainly wouldn't criticize that desire. He's the president. He gets to put his appointees into leadership positions, and they need to develop their agenda and move forward. And so in the short term, this pause on new leases is not particularly disruptive. However, if that pause were to extend for half a year or an entire year or multiple years, then you'll have major economic consequences for the state. And that's where I started before talking about, of that $2.8 billion that was generated from oil and gas revenue last year for the state of New Mexico, $1.5 billion came from activity on federal lands. So over time, you absolutely will see a longer term impact depending on how long that pause that they've put in place remains in place. But in the short term, it hasn't really created much of a disruption for the industry other than making questions about capital investments in New Mexico become much more difficult as people have to determine, are we going to put $100 million into a new oil project in New Mexico over the next year? Or would that be a better investment on the Texas side of the Permian or in another region? So certainly it has created, I think, challenges from a capital investment perspective, but not from a new production perspective right now. And this is what the long-term impacts, if we were to keep this in place for 4 years, like I said, you would go from having an order that's not incredibly disruptive today to it quickly becoming disruptive the longer it remains in place. And you would have just a huge amount of revenue and jobs at stake. And these were from a study conducted by the University of Wyoming, as well as from the New Mexico Tax Research Institute. So federal leasing ban, pause, whatever you want to call it, today does not have a huge impact. But if it lasts for multiple months or years, then it will absolutely have a major revenue impact and job impact to the state. The big issue that I mentioned previously, and I'll finish up after this slide, is where will people invest money in terms of making investments in infrastructure or in projects in the oil and gas industry. And all of this uncertainty regarding federal policy absolutely is shifting investments away from New Mexico. So I think that means that from a longer term perspective, you're going to have a disruption to production levels in New Mexico as a result of the pause or ban, again, depending on its duration. If after 6 months, the Biden administration were to determine that we've completed our programmatic and permitting review, these are our initiatives we're going to pursue. And these are some rulemakings we're going to engage in. And this is provides clear direction as to this is the regulatory path forward regarding production on federal lands. Then I think you could actually see the uncertainty be eliminated and people would be more willing to consider investing. But when we surveyed our over 1,000 members, we had 86% say they would consider shifting new investments away from New Mexico if that this was before the ban or pause was announced. And that's it. I think I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has. If I haven't put you to sleep with all this oil talk early in the morning, so hopefully everyone was highly caffeinated before my presentation.
We did give them a call. So
there we go, Kathy.
And we do have some questions that were texted in. And the first one is really around the current legislative session. So is there anything happening in the New Mexico legislative session? You really touched on the sort of the federal level of things, but what are some things that are happening at the state level that you're either excited about or that you're concerned about and that you think people should be aware of?
Well, I'll start with the positive because I'm an optimist by nature. From a positive perspective, I think, I'm pleased that we as a state continue to prioritize public education and that continues to be a priority under Governor Lujan Grisham. I think, and it's not just because I care deeply about public education or, on a personal level, but which I do, but from a professional perspective, one of the most important components to attracting professionals to locate in New Mexico is our public education system. Whenever we survey people, executives within the industry about what are the key factors they will consider on whether to relocate and then whether to stay in an area, public schools are by far and away the single greatest factor. There's other factors like public safety and things, but really public education plays a huge role in attracting professionals to the state. So if we want to grow our economy, we absolutely have to understand that public education is not only important for our children today, it's also important for our economy. So I'm pleased that we continue to see a priority among both political parties as well as our governor to invest and prioritize public education and improving outcomes there. Putting on my purely oil and gas hat, gosh, there have been so many proposals that that are designed to harm the industry or to drive the industry out of New Mexico. It's been remarkable how many bills are really directed squarely at the industry and aren't necessarily trying to do much in terms of increasing our, the stringency of the environmental regulations. It seems to be much more punitive in nature. And so I've seen quite a bit of legislation that simply doesn't make sense. And I'm not just talking about the fracking ban that Senator Cedillo Lopez and the other senators other than Senator Cervantes on the Senate Conservation Committee voted in favor of. That in and of itself is irresponsible legislation, since if you're going to ban oil and gas activity, then I think you need a plan in place to be able to replace that revenue. And I think, Senator Stewart introduced a working group to start to consider how the state is going to replace fossil fuels over the longer term. And I actually think that's a much more forward-looking idea, is if you're going to get rid of our industry, you better have a plan. But simply moving a fracking ban in place without a plan is irresponsible and really just political theater, because I don't think anyone actually wants that bill to move. But there's a lot of other bills that impact our industry that I think are just purely punitive, whether it's allowing people to sue the industry more, or which, again, I think we have a strong regulator. If we need more authority for our regulators, then let's work together to deal with that. But just creating a free-for-all where you can sue everyone, including the oil and gas industry, doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. As well as, there's a number of bills to change our air quality regulations, which, typically we've always followed the Federal Clean Air Act. And I don't really see why we wouldn't want to pursue direction under the Federal Clean Air Act, especially, since, I think people have previously wanted to follow or oppose what's happening on the federal level. I do think it's better just to have consistency, and having consistent regulatory framework with the federal government under the Clean Air Act makes a lot of sense to me. But there's quite a bit of legislation. I could sit here all day. We're tracking our lobbyist is tracking about a dozen bills that would have a major negative impact on the oil and gas industry. And our approach is generally on each of these bills to try to understand what the goal is in terms of what the policy outcome that the sponsor is trying to achieve is. And if we can figure out a way to do it that makes sense, that's not going to be harmful to our industry, then we're always going to try to find that solution in that middle ground. And we're doing that on certain pieces of legislation right now, but there's many others where there's really not a plan. It's more of a punitive measure that's just trying to send a message to our industry. And, and that stuff it's hard to find a middle ground if someone just wants to keep it in the ground.
Got it. And so you actually touched on this briefly. One of the questions came through about what kind of challenges are you facing as an industry with these discrepancies between you've got federal regulations and then you have the state coming in. So can you talk a little bit more about how that is just as an ongoing challenge for the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, I mean, it makes New Mexico a more complex regulatory environment. And I think the biggest, people compare New Mexico to Texas constantly in our industry because, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, there's so much production occurring in Texas already throughout the state, but then we obviously share the Permian Basin. And so it's a natural comparison. And, one of the big differentiators is that Texas doesn't have any of any significance, any public lands in the state. There's a less than 1% of public ownership of land in Texas. So it's a tiny fraction. New Mexico, we have, obviously different regulatory landscapes depending on where you're operating. And even if you're operating on a portion of state land, because we have a checkerboard ownership pattern, you still may need to deal with both state and federal regulations as you put your project into place. So it's not something that we're not able to manage and adapt to. I mean, that's our job. If we want to do business here, we got to make sure we're complying with all the rules in place. And we certainly understand that and take that seriously. It does make it more complicated. And certainly whenever there's political transitions and there's policy changes, that just, again, I'm not saying that that's wrong or right. That's just life. We're going to have different people come in and they have a right. They've been elected to put in place their policies, and they certainly have a right to do that. But it does create the potential for there to be some change, and which again, it's not something that we fear. It just makes it a little bit more complex. But I think the good thing is we got a lot of smart people, and it gives them job security because certainly on the regulatory side, it's constantly evolving.
All right. So one of the other things that came up, and one of the reasons we actually put this virtual Roundhouse together is that we wanted to sort of at least be able to use this time where we can't meet in person to connect people virtually to talk about all the different issues, because, we all tend to get siloed. We tend to get stuck in our industry. We focus on our industry's needs, but we've had some great crossover conversations with different groups over the course of the virtual Roundhouse. So as the representative for the oil and gas industry, what's the best way for other businesses and other interest groups to learn about how your industry operates, to learn about what you're doing? I think you guys frequently take a bad rap for as an industry, but you do a lot of things well and you do a lot of things right. And you have, as you said, you have a lot of smart people, following the rules and trying to make things work. So what's the best way for people to learn about some of that stuff? And also then how can they partner with you to communicate to their policymakers, both at the state level and the federal level, about how important your industry is and to be supportive of you?
Thank you. I appreciate that your statement as well as your question. So thank you first and foremost for recognizing that it is hard. I mean, we certainly are not immune to criticism, and it's fair. I mean, look, if we're the largest industry in the state, and dogs, they don't bark at parked cars. So we are moving. We are.
Hi, dog.
But we certainly, I think, it's our job to respond to that criticism and to acknowledge it and to listen to people's concerns, and we take that obligation very seriously. I think the best way to connect with us is through our website or our social media platforms. I mean, we should if anyone, it's not hard to find us. We are like Flo from Progressive. We're all over the place on social media and on the web. Our website is www.nmoga.org. But we're very active in terms of content creation on Facebook. And if you go to our website, you can contact one of our staff members. We have an outstanding staff, and really our director of community engagement is a woman named Gloria Ruiz. And Gloria comes from a public education background. And, her gift has been really trying to create opportunities for us to talk to people and to have conversations with different individuals and leaders outside of the oil patches, right? I mean, we have, the one thing I would point out about our industry is that the communities where we operate, the communities who are actually most burdened by our industry because of truck traffic or noise, those communities are the most supportive of the oil and gas industry. And it doesn't boil down to, we look at these issues and it really doesn't boil down to political party. It really boils down to familiarity with the industry. And the more people get to know our industry, the more they understand who we are, and the more we can listen to their concerns and have an intelligent conversation about what their questions are, the more people support us. And we found that time and time again. And so Gloria's really done great work working within communities in New Mexico where they don't see us, they don't interact with us every day. Our children don't go to school together. We're not out socializing together. It's, we're in Albuquerque and Santa Fe and Las Cruces and all these other great portions of the state that get benefits of the industry. We felt like it was important to make sure we're talking to people and business groups and partnering as much as possible. And so that's been a major initiative of ours. You can certainly get information on how to contact Gloria. She's very visible on our website. You can, and we'd be happy to connect with anybody. And that not only goes to speaking with the groups or attending your meetings. I mean, it's also about supporting the causes that you care about in your community. I mean, we not only are really interested in making sure we're responding to concerns and educating people about our industry, we're also very interested in making sure that we're extending our outreach from a community giving perspective outside of the oil patch. And so we've been very active through our community impact program called the Brighter Future Fund to make sure we're providing grants to different causes and foundations and issues all throughout the state. And Gloria manages that as well. So we not only want to get to know you, we want to get to know what you care about and figure out how we can work with you. So please don't hesitate to contact Gloria, and we'd love to start to talk to you and have a conversation.
Perfect. And I think it's important that people recognize how much you do contribute, because the one thing that's come up through the virtual Roundhouse, the common core issue that everybody comes back to is education and making sure that we support the education department and how important it is for the future of children, but also how important it is for every business to have an educated workforce that they can tap into, and that there's an educated workforce that you touched on this earlier that can be used as a recruiting tool. So, I look forward to getting to work with you to talk about how much you're involved in the education department. So do you want to touch just a little bit more on that? Because I think that's frequently overlooked as to what a foundation you are for funding education.
Yeah, well, I mean, first and foremost, the revenue, like I said, $1.4 billion to public education last year. The industry is by far and away the largest funder of public education in New Mexico. So again, you don't have opportunities, whether it be to provide free college tuition to each New Mexican, something we've supported and continue to support, or teacher raises, or increasing opportunities for early childhood development. Those types of opportunities are made possible by the strength of the oil and gas industry. But we also believe that, and I think we've seen this, well, certainly I've seen it. I taught for a couple of years before I went to law school. So I have an appreciation of how difficult it is to stand in front of a room of kids every day, and how really hard it is to be a teacher, and how valuable it is to be a teacher to our society and to our children. So I think we also want to make sure we're supporting teachers and making sure, as we're also supporting parents though as well. So I think we've seen over this last year that it takes a full community to be behind children and teachers in order to make sure we're able to get the type of results we want. There's no silver bullet. If it was easy, New Mexico wouldn't continue to be behind the rest of the country when it comes to addressing these problems. And it's not just based on money either. It takes a variety of different tools to help increase outcomes, whether it be ensuring people have opportunities for out of school learning, which we've been a strong supporter of through the NMMOST, the New Mexico Out of School Time Network, or it's providing opportunities for teachers to really hone their skills and their craft. And we've sponsored the New Mexico Teacher of the Year program for the last couple of years since its inception, in order to provide a sabbatical or educational learning resources for the Teacher of the Year. And we do events all over the state where we really try to recognize teachers, and we support different schools. We had a really fun program a couple of years ago where we went and did a makeover for teachers' lounges all across the state. And again, the goal was just to show teachers we appreciate them, and we want to give them a professional setting where they could actually take a break and enjoy their lunch. We've also done a lot of work with backpack giveaways, school supplies, scholarship opportunities. We're a big sponsor of Mana de Albuquerque, which is an amazing program. So we're really heavily involved throughout the educational community. And I think, like I said, this last year, having to return to teaching part-time to help my children in virtual learning, it not only made me more appreciative of what their teachers do inside the classroom, but also having to then entertain them after school, it gave me an appreciation of what we have to do outside the classroom to help reinforce the outcomes and the concepts they're learning during their academic day. So we really try to be involved as much as possible. And our goal is really, we want to avoid any type of political issues when it comes to education. We just want to give teachers a platform and focus on outcomes for students. And I think our experience is that we know how to produce energy, and we're good at that. And we're going to let the educational leaders, the educators, we're going to let them figure out how to get better outcomes from an educational perspective. So our approach has been to support teachers, educators at all levels, and really try to help them do their jobs better, and not to pretend like we have all the answers, because we don't. We're good at drilling wells, at moving hydrocarbons safely, at doing our oil and gas work. We're not. If we were good at teaching, we'd be doing that instead of engineering and working in the oil field.
Perfect. So before we let you go, I'm just going to check and see if we have any more questions that have come in. Let me just. Yeah, I think we're good there. So again, before we let you off the hook, what's the primary message you want to get out there to New Mexicans in regards to the legislative session that's currently going on? What's your one big takeaway for the 2021 New Mexico legislative session?
Do no harm.
Oh.
That would be my message. I mean, really, we should be focusing on a public health crisis and on economic recovery. And our industry is poised to help lead us from an economic recovery perspective. There's no reason why. Really, the only reason why we should be facing a revenue crunch or challenge next year will be because of policy decisions that are made right now at the state and federal levels. If we continue to make smart policy decisions, and I'm not saying no policy decisions, I mean smart policy decisions. Governor Lujan Grisham just finished a rulemaking on methane emissions that's going to make New Mexico have the most stringent regulatory landscape of any in the country. So we can work collaboratively on regulations that'll help increase the environmental oversight of our industry. It's not deregulation or just ignoring the industry. We recognize the important role of oversight, but there's a way to be collaborative and solution-centered when it comes to these challenges, and then there's a way to be punitive and harm the industry and therefore harm the state. And so my hope is that people will work with the industry in order to allow us to lead the state through this economic recovery and to continue to deliver for the state and for our schools. And I hope with 3 weeks to go, a little less than 3 weeks to go, our legislators will do no harm.
That is a perfect summary. So thank you for that. Thank you again for all this information. And we may have you back on the 16th just to talk about a wrap up of what's actually happened during the session. Right. But I'm glad we got to hear from your industry, because it is, again, it's an economic driving force for the entire state. So thank you for making time for us. I know it's busy for you during the session. So we'll let you get back to it, and we'll have you back.
Thank you so much, Kathy.
All right. Have a good one. So hopefully that was an informative session for everyone. I do think that this is a valuable use of this platform, is to give everyone a chance to learn about different industries, to learn about different issues, and to have that interaction to see how all of these businesses, how all of these industries work together, and how we're all connected. And the best way to find solutions is to communicate together, to put together solutions that work for the entire state. So again, thank you to the Oil and Gas Association for giving us that update and for talking about the important economic impact that they have across New Mexico. We're gearing up for our next session, which will be starting in just a little bit. And that is an amazing organization that works for a group that is an important group and often an overlooked group, and that is the foster children in New Mexico. And this organization is focused on providing support, not just for foster children, but for the service providers who support the foster child or the foster system. So we are going to take a quick break and let everyone grab a cup of coffee, and then we will be back with you with New Mexico Child First Network. Just as a reminder, after that, we will have Be Well New Mexico talking about open enrollment for health insurance in New Mexico. And then our last session of the day at 1 o'clock will be Ben Lewinger with the New Mexico Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. So we'll take a quick break and be back with you at 11 o'clock.